Hey, I'm John Cannell, and today on Preppy Kitchen, we're making a luscious caramel cake. So let's get started. First off, set your oven to 350. We want it nice and hot, and in a large bowl, add 390 grams or 3¼ cups of all-purpose flour. For contrast, I want half a teaspoon of salt. I'd use sea salt in this recipe if I were you. It's a nice, gentle saltiness. Iodized salt is gonna be really like, too much. To puff things up, I want 2 teaspoons of baking powder. Grab a whisk, say goodbye to your scale, and we're gonna mix this up. Just whisk, whisk, whisk until it's nice and distributed. Okay. Set that aside. Let's get our mixer out and some room temperature butter. Now I want 3 sticks, 1½ cups, 340 grams of unsalted room temperature butter. We're gonna add this to the bowl of our stand mixer fitted with a paddle attachment or a big bowl if you're using a hand mixer, and cream this up until it is nice and smooth. I do want to point out that your butter should be room temperature, and that means that if I press down with my finger, I can indent in it using a little bit of pressure so it's not completely melty, but it's not firm at all. And I could bend this butter, it's not gonna break. If it's too stiff, it won't mix well. If it's too loose, it won't form this beautiful matrix we want. Mix on medium until it is light and creamy. Now it's time to add our sugar in. I'm using the scale just for fun. 500 grams or 2½ cups granulated sugar. So this cake, by the way, is like a luscious, melt in your mouth vanilla cake, completely covered in a caramel frosting. And it's really fun to make, so don't be intimidated by making this caramel at home. My sugar's in, but it's all butter on the bottom, sugar on top. How will that mix? With difficulty. So let's give it a head start by scraping the bowl down. This looks much better. So now pop it back onto your mixer. And we're gonna beat on medium speed for about 5 minutes until it's light and fluffy. And you can scrape the bowl down again if needed. Okay, 5 minutes on medium speed. It'll look really nice and fluffy when you're done. While it mixes, we're gonna crack our eggs into a bowl so we can make sure there are no shells. 5 eggs, room temperature is best. They really mix up nicer if they're room temperature. The eggs are gonna be a binding agent to hold things together, and they also give you some body and richness too. Scrape that down. It's kind of like all going up to the top. Okay, 2 more minutes. We'll be right back. Look at this. Light, cloudy, fluffy butter and sugar. If you look at the difference between the butter and the sugar, you can see much lighter and of course fluffier too. Now, while mixing on medium, I'm adding the eggs in one at a time, and yes, there will be some more scraping down happening. You'll have a beautiful, like luscious, eggy soup on top with pure butter and sugar on the bottom. It already happened. So scrape, scrape, scrape. Keep going. And the last egg goes in. I'm also gonna add in 1 tablespoon of vanilla. That's so nice. Let's take a look. That looks pretty nice. Fairly well mixed. I'm gonna mix this just for a minute while I measure out 1 cup of milk, 240 mils. Much better. The mixture looks so fluffy and incredible. 3 9-inch pans. I'm gonna butter and flour these. You could use baking spray, but here's the deal. As a rule, if the cake is dark, like a spice cake, a gingerbread cake, a chocolate cake, baking spray is just fine. If it's a light cake, like a vanilla or even a yellow cake, I do not want to use that because baking spray really browns in the oven. So for those cakes, I like to have a butter and flour situation. A wee bit of flour, about 1 tablespoon, kick it around, and repeat for the rest of your pans. Better to do this now than while everything is mixed together and that baking powder is reacting with everything else. Add the flour in 3 batches, alternating with the milk. So 1/3 of the flour in right now, mix on low while we add in ½ cup of milk. Another 1/3 of the flour, the remaining milk, and the remaining flour. This is a little bit of a mess. If you look inside, there's streaks of flour galore, but I want to finish this off by hand so I know that it won't be overmixed. When you overmix your cake batter, it won't be soft and amazing. It'll be a little bit more gummy and dense. Get rid of all that flour, fold it in, scrape the bowl down, pay attention to the bottom of the bowl where a lot of things are lurking that you don't like. That looks nice. We're gonna distribute the batter into our 3 prepared 9-inch pans. And I am soaking some cake strips right now. They're optional, but they're gonna give you a really flat cake layer. I'm using a scale just to double check. These are basically the same. Once everything's nice and even, go ahead and level the cake layers out. They'll self-level a bit in the oven, but you always wanna give them the best head start possible. Wet fabric strips, AKA cake strips, will cool the edge of your cake down in the oven and let it rise up in a nice even flat layer. Some recipes, like a lot of chocolate cakes that I make, don't require a cake strip because the way it's formulated, it'll just rise up in a nice flat layer. But a lot of the thicker batters, like for a vanilla cake, will definitely need them. These guys are ready to go into the oven for 30 to 35 minutes or until the centers are springy to the touch, and let them cool in the pans for like 15 to 20 minutes and then invert them out and you'll see how beautiful they look. In you go. While my cakes are in the oven, we're gonna make this amazing caramel frosting. This cake is like drenched in caramel and it's so delicious. Grab a medium saucepan and you want 3 sticks of butter, 1.5 cups, 339 grams. I'm using unsalted butter. If you want to use salted butter, that's totally fine. Just add half the salt instead of what I'm gonna tell you in a minute. And by the way, it's a cold day. I actually microwaved this butter so it'd be somewhat soft. I just get annoyed waiting for butter to melt when it's ice cold. Now I want 3 cups or 660 grams of brown sugar. If you're using cups, just make sure that you pack the sugar down. It's very fluffy. And if you see any giant boulders, go ahead and break them up with your hands. Yeah, every once in a while, you come across something like this, which I don't know if you can tell, but it's just like a solid rock of sugar. I'm setting that aside, it's never gonna melt. Perfect, 660 grams. I want 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. If you used salted butter, I would just add 1/4 of a teaspoon. I measured out 1/2 cup or 120 mils of cream. Now I just want to add 1/2 cup of milk. Pour that in. Look at this mountain of deliciousness. This is gonna go over medium heat now. Basically, you're gonna make an easy brown sugar caramel, let it cool down a bit, and then whip some powdered sugar in there so it becomes a frosting that you're gonna love. On to heat. Pop that on. Medium heat. And you're gonna start stirring occasionally at first until the butter melts, and then frequently. And you want this to get to a boil and then come to 230 to 235 degrees, which is a softball stage for caramel. And I'll talk about that in a second. This is so much nicer if you've softened your butter. I'm just putting it out there. Whenever I make a caramel like this and the butter is rock hard, even if I cut it into little pieces, I swear I'm waiting forever for it to melt. And in the meantime, my thought is that the brown sugar and milk are getting too hot. So have everything be kind of room temperature if you can. It's okay if the cream and milk are cold. Keep stirring. You don't want the edge to singe or get really burnt. And everything should just be kind of like the same temperature, slowly warming up until it comes to a boil. And while that happens, I know a lot of you might not have a candy thermometer at home. What you can do is grab a little cold water, and you can take a drop of this once it's come to a boil and you're thinking it might get close, add that in, and it should feel like sap. You can take that drop out of the cold water. If it dissolves completely, caramel's too cold. If it forms a soft ball, which is where the word comes from, it's ready. If it forms a hard ball, like hard plastic, it got too hot. So if you don't have a thermometer, just keep monitoring it using some cold water. It's called the cold water test. And by the way, this smells so good right now. This is basically just a big batch of caramel. You can make this, pour it over your ice cream, have it with by the spoonful. It's just delicious. Right now we're at 160. We've got a ways to go. If I was making a straight caramel, just sugar that I'm melting with a little bit of water, totally different scenario. I would not be stirring this at all. I would have a wet brush just to wash the side down once or twice to make sure the sugar is tamped down and not burning. And it would really just be on its own until it comes to the correct color. This, with all the cream and everything else, is a completely different type of caramel, and you really need to stir it. So stir, 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 and you're gonna see that it gets really bubbly at a certain point, and you might have to reduce the temperature, 217, 220, so it's coming close. This stove, by the way, is like hot as a dragon's mouth, and it has completely different times for heating things up, so it's always like faster on the stove. When you make a caramel, temperature rises really fast, but it gets to a certain plateau in the 220s, and then it slows down because you need to like really boil off the water that was added from the milk and the cream to a lesser extent to get that temperature to come up to the 330s. What did I say, 230 or 330? To come up to the 230s. Oh my gosh, I was like, that'd be very hot. Yeah, so now it's at 224. So you can see it really slows down, but that doesn't mean you stop stirring. 228, getting close. As it gets warmer, you'll see the bubbles change. Instead of being frothy, you'll get more large bubbles that are kind of burping slowly. It's just at 230. I'm gonna take it to 232, split the difference, and never touch the pan with your thermometer. That gives you an inaccurate reading. You're only touching while you're eating. That hit 232. I'm taking this off heat, and I wanna show you the softball test. This is not a pure caramel. We added all the other delicious things in, but just take a spoonful, drop it into your cold water. Ah, perfect. And you can see it forms these little like soft balls of sugar. They don't dissolve away. And in my fingers, it is like a perfect caramel sauce. Ah, how nice. This is screaming hot right now. We're gonna pour this into the bowl of our stand mixer and let it hang out for maybe 20 minutes until it comes to 150. So just to see, right now, this is at just under 200 degrees. I want it to come down 50 degrees more to 150 before we start stirring it. The main thing is you'll notice it's gonna start to thicken up. So leave it in here for about 20 minutes. Stir occasionally just so it cools evenly. And if you wanna speed things up, it could go into the fridge. Stir more frequently though, because it'll really cool the edge down fast. The center will be hot as fire. We'll be right back. It's been a few minutes. You can see this caramel is really a bit thicker now. It's not thick like a caramel candy at all, but it's almost like caramel sauce. Right now, we're gonna cool it and pump some air into it by mixing it up with a whisk. You can use a hand mixer if you wanna stand around for 10 minutes, or a stand mixer with a whisk attachment, beat on medium-high for 10 minutes. It'll cool it down, it'll pump air into it, it'll become thicker, and then once it's at that stage, we can add a little bit of confectioner sugar just to help it set up. In the meantime, oh my gosh, all the aromas. Don't eat it yet. It's so good though. 10 minutes later, and look at this. We've pumped some air into it. It's significantly thicker, but we need to have a little bit more structure, so I'm gonna add 1.5 cups of powdered sugar right now. Okay, mix this on low, just until it's combined mostly. And then we're gonna increase to medium-high again. And then you want this to be just thickened enough so it's pourable but spreadable. Already, I want you to see, as I scrape the bowl down with the whisk, see that? That's looking much nicer already. I'm gonna mix this for a few minutes and just see where we are. Eyeball it, it really depends on the ambient temperature, your mixer bowl, etc., etc. In the meantime, we can grab our cake plate or whatever you're gonna put the cake on, get the layers out, they've been cooling, and assemble our cake. Okay, so you have a choice here. This is what my caramel looks like now. That's pretty nice. It's gonna work, but this is not buttercream. This is caramel that we whipped up. It'll drip and be like very affected by gravity, let's put it that way. You can add in like another tablespoon or two of confectioner sugar to help stiffen it up. Mix that in and you're gonna be good to go. If, for example, you made your caramel, but it never got hot enough and you didn't know that, and you're at this stage and you're like, oh my gosh, it is like not thickening up at all, it's really runny, go ahead and just add more powdered sugar in. Yes, it'll be sweeter, but it'll also like have more stability and really stick on the cake. Okay, let's see. That looks nicer to me. It's really like holding some more of its shape, see? A nice slow pour. Perfect. Grab about half a cup of the caramel. Just about half a cup. Ooh. Right now this is goopy and spreadable. It will calm down and stiffen up as it cools. Use a spatula and just spread that out into a nice thin layer. By the way, if you wanted a darker caramel color, you would use dark brown sugar, just if you want that. One layer done. Grab the next layer, plop it on, and repeat the process. This cake has dulce de leche vibes. I'm really tempted to have this be like a messy, drippy cake, but no, we're gonna finish it off. Plop that on. One more half cup. Straighten your cake out in case it's getting a little bit wobbly. And now we're going to smooth the top out and let some of the frosting cascade down the side. I'm gonna do a really quick, thin crumb coat, and then we'll add the rest of the frosting on. Ooh. Let gravity pull the frosting down. And I just want to protect any like crumbs from coming out. It's not your time, crumbs. It's not your time. Spreading it out into a nice thin layer. I will say, these cake layers are so soft and moist. Just wait till you bake this. They're not very crummy. Crumb coat complete. I have a bunch of extra frosting though. So, what I'm gonna do is break out my cake turntable. I mean, this cake looks delicious. This is what like my cakes look like growing up a lot of times, but we're gonna up the ante. Love seeing those plops. Part of me just wants to have it be like a drip cake with like a gooey, oozy caramel situation, but not today. I think this looks so cool, I almost want to keep it, but I'm gonna go back to my original idea, scrape the side down, and let's see what we can do. This is really on my Virgo nerves. It doesn't look perfect. So right now I'm just going to give it a couple swoops like this to give it some texture and just get a little spiral pattern in there. Let me know if you like this decoration scheme. It's a bit different for what I usually do, but you have limited options with the caramel. A delicious caramel, oh my gosh. It could just be kind of goopy and swoopy. You could swoop it up. You can try and do a spiral pattern like this. Anything's gonna work. You can pop this into the fridge to set up a bit, then give it a cut, and it's ready to enjoy. Oh my God. That caramel is everything. It's so decadent and full of flavor, and the cake itself is a cloud of moist vanilla amazingness. I hope you get a chance to try this recipe, and if you like this video, check out my easy cake playlist.